cannot keep us in. Oh, thank you, Don. Once again. Okay. Yes. So since the Kehillah can no longer keep us in line, then maybe we need something else or someone else to keep us in line. Okay, and this could be a way of a reason to enlarge the power of rabbis, which is also something that we're going to see that really does come out in certain elements of Orthodoxy later on. But even with all of that, even though all that stuff is happening, the vast majority of Jews are not Rav Yonatan Eibschitz. They're not Rav Yaakov Emden. They're not the Vilna Gaon. I won't say they're not the Hasidim because that became a very big movement. Okay, but in terms of like excommunication and delegitimization, this isn't what most Jews were involved with. Most Jews remained traditional in Eastern Europe through the end of the 1900s. Of the 1800s of the 19th century. If we go to Central Europe, things happen about a century in advance. Okay, and most Jews remained traditional until the end of the 1700s. Okay, we saw Solomon Maimon, for instance, right? He's right at the end of the 1700s. This is a guy with a first-class mind and a kind of a low-class personality, okay, who decides to leave all this tradition behind. And what makes him exceptional is how early he did it. He was one of the first. Okay? There were not too many Jews in his time who were going down the path that he was going on. There were some, okay, but there weren't so many. And if you notice, even in his stories, all of the Jews that he's coming in contact with are what? They're all what?
Traditional.
All of the Jews, except for Mendelssohn, basically, all of the Jews he describes are traditional. Okay, even in Germany, okay, because he still hasn't gotten to the end of the 1800s in the story that he's talking about. Okay, yeah.
Will you be coming to it later? I still don't understand the difference between traditional Jewry in those days,
Yeah.
to Orthodox. What's the difference?
Why, Gordon, does a Jew keep Shabbos in the Jew in Germany in the 1700s?
The Bible, the follow.
Okay, because the Torah says so, and we got the Torah by tradition from my parents and my grandparents and my great-great-parents way back through all the generations. And so that's how I was brought up, and that's the tradition I've inherited. That's pre-modern. Okay, what is modern? Modern is when the Kehillah collapses. The country around you says you're a citizen, do whatever the heck you want, as long as you don't break any laws. And now you are faced with a choice. Do I consciously leave this tradition behind? Or do I consciously keep this tradition, even though nobody's forcing me to? Okay? That decision is what became later on known as Orthodoxy.
In other words, you're carrying on the same thing as before.
Mm-hmm. Seemingly the same thing as before. Maybe you're keeping Shabbos. Gordon, maybe your Shabbos. Well, if for an Orthodox Jew in Germany in the 1800s already, maybe his Shabbos looked pretty much like a Shabbos 200 years before. Maybe. Okay, so you're saying the Shabbos looks the same. Okay, maybe it does, but the choice makes all the difference. This is a Jew who is turning the Shabbos into an ideology. You have to keep Shabbos, even though nobody's making you do it. Even though the Kehillah is not watching you. Okay? Even though nobody has control over you. And you have to keep Shabbos in the face of all those other Jews, like assimilationists, reformists, Baruch Mechayeh Meitim. Hannah Sheridan just walked in after ages in Canada.
She wanted to get warm.
She wanted to get warm, okay. But seriously, Gordon, I'll tell you where the difference most comes out. Okay, the difference most comes out with your children. Okay, in pre-modern times, you could be pretty sure that if you were keeping Shabbos then,
Your children.
your kids would keep Shabbos, your grandchildren would keep Shabbos, and you didn't have to make too much of an effort to make sure that would happen. Okay? In modern times, your life is going to revolve around all kinds of strenuous efforts to do anything possible to make sure that your kids will keep Shabbos, and that they won't be infected by their Reform neighbors, and that they won't be infected by their assimilationist neighbors. Okay, and that's where it becomes highly different.
But the main point I'm trying to get at is
Yeah.
it's not a different form of practicing Judaism like Reform became.
Yeah.
When you compare it to the traditional thing, they're still carrying on the same traditions.
Let's say
no, we want.
What?
okay,
Gordon's
Gordon.
asking, was
Yeah.
Tevye an Orthodox Jew?
No,
No,
Tevye was not an Orthodox Jew.
of course he was.
No,
He
he
wasn't.
didn't
He didn't have a name,
Oh.
but
Oh, he wasn't.
Tevye keep Shabbos in one word. Sing it.
Tradition.
No. Okay, he is not an Orthodox Jew. Okay, we're gonna get an example of an Orthodox Jew tonight. Okay, and I'm gonna try to make it as colorful as I can. And for those of you who remember all my jokes, oy vey. All right, but that's warning you in advance. Okay, I think Gordon, to take what you're saying and honor it, I think we can sum it up by saying that even that the practices, many of the practices, most of the practices look the same, but the mentality is very, very different. In other words, Tevye's mentality presumably was like his grandfather's mentality. The mentality of an Orthodox Jew in Germany was no longer like his grandfather's mentality. Okay, and eventually what that will cause is it will also cause differences in practice. Okay, and that's something I'm going to try to emphasize tonight.
Because
Yeah.
the grandfather would not really have any choice,
Yeah,
but this guy has choice.
Right.
So what the difference is that I
Yeah.
have a choice,
yeah,
well, before I didn't.
right. Yeah,
I think that's the
okay,
issue.
but that changes your whole life, because when you have a choice and the choice you make is a difficult one, and it's a difficult one to pass on to your kids, then your whole life is going to be a life of struggle and tension and fighting off threats. Okay?
Just
Yeah.
a thought, actually. I wonder, is there really a connection between the fact that Protestantism revolts against the Catholic Church?
Absolutely, yes.
And centuries later, revolts against the Orthodox Judaism was also.
Absolutely, yes. When I either know that I'm not going to insult somebody by saying this, or on the other hand, want to insult somebody by saying this, okay, I like to call Orthodox and Reform Judaism, and also conservative, you could put it in the same bucket. I call it Protestant Judaism. Exactly what you're saying. In other words, why is it happening so much in Germany more than anywhere else? Because Germany is a Protestant country, and you have all these different denominations of churches. And this is how reform happens. What goes on with reform? Well, last week, or 2 weeks ago, we saw with Solomon Maimon his embarrassing attempt to become Christian. Do you remember this?
To become,
Yeah, he writes to the pastor, he says, even though I don't really believe in your dogmas, and kind of hinting, between the lines, I bet you don't really believe in your dogmas either, right? I do want to officially become a Christian so that I can attend your church as a social duty, okay? Now, when he does this, okay, when he does this, he's rejecting a tradition. He wants to become something else. He doesn't care about being Jewish anymore. Okay,
Doesn't care about being Christian.
and he doesn't care about being Christian either. Okay, and what he did was done by tens of thousands of German Jews 2 centuries ago. He's not the only one. It was important that we read that a couple of weeks ago because it's representative of a very, very big trend. Okay, I have another text which I'm not going to read with you tonight because it's basically taking Solomon Maimon's letter and like rewriting it in somebody else's words. Okay, a fellow by the name of Jacob Friedlander, who was on the board of whatever there was, I don't know, the directors of the Jewish community of Berlin, right around the year 1800, he did the exact same thing, except that he said it out loud. In the letter, he actually says openly that an enlightened man like you, Pastor, who, you can't believe literally in these dogmas either, but will you accept me into your church as an act of social, whatever you call it, and of course, he's not accepted, okay? Tens of thousands of German Jews do this until some of them come up with the following idea, okay? And the idea is very, very simple. We don't really want to become Christians. We don't really believe in it. That's why all these people are banging their heads against the church door and, nobody's letting them in because they don't really want to be Christians. We don't really want to be Christians. And as a matter of fact, maybe we want to be Jews.
Different Jews.
But different Jews. And we have a model, thank you, Brian. We have a model in our Protestant neighbors. When a Protestant doesn't like his church, what does he do?
He makes a new church.
He makes a new kind of church. Okay. We don't like our synagogue. We don't like our rabbis. We don't like, these old-time traditional Jews. So what will we do? We will do what Martin Luther did. In fact, what did Martin Luther do as a verb?
Protested.
He did protest. I meant a different verb.
Reformation, reform.
Reformed. He wanted to reform the church. So if Martin Luther can reform the church, create a reformed church, then we can recreate the reformed new synagogue. Yes.
In all fairness to Martin Luther.
What?
In all fairness to Martin Luther, he
Yes.
wasn't trying to change the dogmas of the Catholic Church, but to cut out the corruption.
Martin Luther, you say, was not trying to change the dogmas of the Catholic Church. He was just trying to cut out the corruption. I would say,
Buying
with respect, I would say almost the opposite. It was the corruption in the Catholic Church, which he went against, which ultimately gave him and his movement their power. Because without the desire to get rid of that corruption, it would have never taken hold. But what he really wanted to do, Martin Luther, in his more like spiritual heart, was to return to the Bible, okay? Was to reject church traditions about the Bible that he thought don't match the text. Okay, that's also very much part of Martin Luther. The what? The infallibility of the Pope is a the church that he did not find in the Bible. Okay, it's an example of it.
How about infallibility of the rabbis?
There was no infallibility of the rabbis until
Until there
It
was
was a
reform.
rabbinate.
until a little later. It took about a century after Reform to actually, we're going to hopefully get to that tonight too. Okay, the infallibility of the rabbis, but there was no infallibility of the rabbis. So Reform Judaism could not come up against infallibility of the rabbis since it didn't exist. But they could come up against a whole bunch of other stuff that is primitive and disgusting, like keeping kosher. Throw me more examples. Circumcision,
Kippah,
wearing a head covering. When you come into the synagogue, what should you do?
take off your
You
head.
should take off your hat. Very nice. What else?
Mikvah.
Mikvah. Okay. More examples. Give me lots. Primitive, superstitious, unaesthetic things in the Jewish tradition. In the eyes of a German in the 19th century.
Sacrifice.
Sacrifices, of course.
There's also,
Thank God we don't have a temple. Yeah, what?
there's also,
Having a beard.
The
Growing
sun is superstitious ornament. Yeah, what else?
Wearing a
We
beard.
forgot tefillin.
Tefillin. Much. Tefillin, what kind of primitive, how do you say, amulet? Okay, is that? What else? More
Beard.
examples.
A beard.
The whole idea of kashrut.
Kashrut, very nice, yeah.
Shomrei Shabbat.
Shmirat Shabbat.
Okay, all of these archaic Sabbath laws. I don't think they want to do away with the Sabbath completely.
No,
But they don't want all these archaic Sabbath laws. And even more than that, wouldn't it be better if it was on?
Sunday. Like everybody else.
There are still major Reform synagogues in the US who have their Shabbat services on Sunday.
Elisheva said something that I honestly never heard of in my life.
Really?
The Reform synagogues in the US, there are some who have Shabbat on Sunday. I never knew that.
The major
Really?
place
Very
called
few, very few. It's not usual at all.
Lynn. And there's
Elisheva,
on Sunday.
the people on Zoom, Elisheva is naming them. I guess, yeah.
I can tell you in Britain, the Reform still have Shabbat, but the liberal on Sundays.
Okay,
It is.
the
There's a liberal movement.
the liberal Jewish
And
movement
they do have service.
has services on
Yeah,
Sunday.
I've heard of
I have
that.
been to that place. And
Yeah,
at the entrance
London.
yeah,
of the, I don't know what you want to call it, sanctuary.
yeah.
There's a statue of Moses.
A statue of Moses.
My
in the-
goodness.
Wow, wow. I'm
That
learning,
freaked me out more than anything.
I never knew this stuff. I guess all the Reform synagogues that I came in contact with in the United States were kind of mild Reform. Because whatever Shemai's saying blows my mind.
This is
What?
an old
What?
glass symbol.
Yeah.
Reform synagogue of the type where they
Okay.
prohibited the wearing of talit.
Yeah,
And really were.
prohibited the wearing of talit. So let's go into the synagogue a little bit. We shouldn't have tefillin. We shouldn't have tefillin. We should remove our head covering. Anything else in the synagogue?
Yes, reading of the Torah on Friday night.
Reading the
Yes.
Torah on
Yeah,
Friday
That's
night
very
says,
common. Reform
says
synagogues
Kana, it's
do that.
reform,
See,
it's common in reform. Okay,
Because they don't have services
Women,
Saturday.
okay.
giving women a place in the.
Giving women a place in the sanctuary. Let's think about what that meant, not in America, but in 19th century Germany. In a Protestant church, where do men and women sit?
Together.
And so too it should be in a modern synagogue. Men and women should sit together. That was one thing. Can you think of other things in the synagogue?
Reading the
No
Torah.
Turning
talation.
on and off lights.
What?
Turning on and off lights.
Well, that wasn't even a hard one. They turned off and on lights once there was electricity with no problem. I'm sure they did it even before there was electricity. With no problem.
Men shouldn't wear telasim in synagogue.
So we already, we had, all right. Let's first talk about the structure of the synagogue. Men and women are sitting together.
No mechitza.
Rabbi,
And the pulpit,
where is the pulpit?
on the
In front of the
bima,
ark.
in front.
It's
of the
in
ark.
front, facing the congregation, as opposed to traditional synagogues
In the middle.
in which the person who leads the prayers or the rabbi or whoever is in the middle. Okay, that's the first thing. Second thing is he's
In the middle,
facing
Facing the Aron
He's
Kodesh.
facing the congregation as opposed to facing the Aron Kodesh. Thirdly, this is a real good one that will, I hope, get you going a little bit. How is the rabbi to dress?
Uh-huh.
In a gown.
Oh, no.
He wears a robe like a priest or a minister.
In these robes of the minister, and in Germany, that included, don't forget, the top hat. Okay, maybe half a meter high. Okay, the rabbi should be wearing a top hat, should be wearing the robes of a minister, because what is he doing as a verb? He is ministering. There are Christians who minister, and there are Jews who minister, and that is the rabbi's job in a modern religion to minister to his congregation. Okay. So we got the dress, we got the sitting, we got the organization of the synagogue. There's still two more things in the
Music.
synagogue we need to touch upon.
Music.
One is music,
Organ.
An organ.
and for whom did Bach write his music?
What a church.
For German churches. This is the most elevated religious music ever written. And so also in a synagogue, we should have elevated religious music, and that requires an organ. It also requires probably
Singing.
a choir, okay? So you have a choir, you have an organ. Yes, Elisheva,
We had an organ in our conservative synagogue,
okay.
and at one point it needed very expensive repairs. And the congregation refused to provide the repairs because we didn't want it.
The congregation, Elisheva mentions a conservative synagogue that had an organ, but the congregation didn't like the organ, so when it needed repairs, they let it go.
It's a chance.
All right, so we got music.
Oh, but we kept the piano.
One more thing. One more thing that's blatant.
The vernacular, using the vernacular.
Language.
Oh, yes, language.
Yes.
What did Martin Luther do?
That's right. He took away with the Latin.
Language.
Use the vernacular instead of Latin.
Yeah, why should a church be run in Latin? Nobody understands Latin anymore.
That's
Prayers
what
in the church should be in
Out.
German. Even the mass should be done in German. And, because of Martin Luther, of course, the Bible was translated into the vernacular of all the nations of Europe, and that was a revolution in world history. It was very important. But more specifically, for our point, if a German church has services in German, so a German synagogue should also have
In
services in. Okay, and that brings us to something which is in the prayers but outside the synagogue, and we shouldn't forget this. What are we praying for?
Second coming.
Or
Not for the second coming of Jesus, no.
Mashiach.
They did not go in that direction.
Mashiach.
for God to be one.
So we used to pray for the Mashiach to come, to ingather the exiles from the lands of our dispersion, the lands of our exile, and to bring us back to our land, and to bring us back to our city, and rebuild our temple, and all of that kind of stuff.
Sounds like a Palestinian.
What? Oh man. All right, so what happens here? We'll start at the end. First of all, there's no more desire for a temple. Got to get rid of that stuff, right?
Yeah.
But what about the more national people side of it?
No,
Return to
No.
land.
Return to Zion was not something the Reform supported.
No.
Yeah. Is Berlin, and it does not.
Germans first and
It
Jews
does.
second.
It does not need to be rebuilt. Berlin, right? It hasn't been raised by the Romans. Okay.
That
And
worked that well for them.
what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Worked that well.
The irony, the historical irony in all of this is so obvious that I don't know if we really need to point it out.
Yeah, when I grew up in my Reformed synagogue, this was in the 40s.
Okay,
The attitude then was, why do Jews need a country? We're a religion. It was after 48, obviously.
Yeah, if you're looking for Palestinians, that's what you should have gone for, right? That is the propaganda over the past, I don't know, 40 years, right? The Jews have no right to a country because they're a religion. And where was this idea born that we're a religion?
In Germany.
In Germany in the 19th century. Okay, all right. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol nהיה b'dvaro.
Amen.
Amen.
Just
Amen.
Okay, yes, Gordon.
wait, was it the Jews or the Christians who first allowed women to be leaders of the congregation?
I honestly don't know.
I don't know.
I
No,
don't
because women were never allowed in the Christian religions until recently
Yeah.
to be.
Very recently.
I
And
honestly.
presumably in Reform, did they allow women rabbis in those?
Not right.
No, 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 no.
No.
No,
No, that happens in the 70s, 80s.
yeah.
Yeah. Gordon is asking, women rabbis, is it first with the Jews? Is it first with the Christians? I honestly don't know the answer, but I'm sure you can Google it, okay?
It's no problem.
The first
to find
cons-
out.
To find out,
The first conservative woman rabbi was
Yeah.
1983.
1983
And she was
conservative.
not well received.
Mhm. Okay, let's get back to our topic. I would like you to meet everything we talked about just now in the words of somebody who not only lived it, but represented it. Okay? And who writes a letter which he meant in all seriousness. He was completely serious, but the letter is hysterical. Okay? I'm going to share with you a letter by this man. Some of you may remember it. Review is not bad, right?
Tiger,
Right? This is Abraham Geiger.
yeah,
Okay, am I sharing?
yes, you're sharing.
Yes.
I am sharing. Okay,
Yes.
okay, so this,
Close that stuff that you're doing now.
what am I,
It's already on the screen.
it won't close. Okay, okay. There we go. I'll also make this smaller, and then I think we'll be able to see the text. Maybe Joseph or somebody on Zoom to read,
Sure.
okay?
Just 1 second. I'll make it clear for myself. Yeah. Okay. It's a letter from Abraham Geiger, who, well, anyway, you'll tell us more about him shortly, I guess, to Leopold Zunz. In the expectation that you will be open and frank with me, even as I'm
Hold on.
sorry.
Hold on, just to introduce it. Okay, so Abraham Geiger is considered the father of the Reform movement. Okay, more or less. Okay, there were others, but he's the main guy. And there's a neat collection of his letters which really bring out, how he saw the world and who he was. This is a letter to his colleague, Leopold Zunz, who was an historian, and we'll talk about him, if I'm not mistaken, next week when we do Wissenschaft des Judentum, the science of Judaism. It's not for tonight, but what I will tell you is that he's almost the father of Jewish history as an academic topic. And I'll also tell you, in order to understand this letter, that later in his life, he did something that was unexpected to Abraham Geiger and disturbed Abraham Geiger profoundly enough to get him to write this letter. Brace yourselves. You know what he did?
He came back to Judaism.
He decided to kosher his kitchen.
Wow.
Oh my, okay. And
Pick
this,
something easy.
and this brings a letter to him from Geiger. Okay, now go ahead, Joseph.
Yeah. Okay. A letter to Leopold Zunz, March 19th, 1845. In the expectation that you will be open and frank with me, even as I am with you, and on the assumption that candid outspokenness will please you more than disabling circumlocution, I would like to discuss with you quite openly something that I have found somewhat disconcerting.
That's a fancy way of saying you did something that bugs me.
And you're not
Okay.
gonna like what I have to say.
And if you're like, I
I'm
have
gonna
to
tell
say.
you anyway.
Okay, and all of these texts we're gonna see written by German Jews, there's gonna be more of them. The sentences are very, very, very
Yes.
long
They say it was in German writing.
in German
That's
writing,
right,
exactly.
yes.
Okay,
Yes, I'm assuming this is a translation from the German, right?
translation from the German, yes.
Okay, I do not wish to criticize, for I know that your words and your actions spring from solid conviction, but solely to ask you to enlighten me as to your reasons for doing as you did. First, there is the essay in the Wiener Kalender, and he gives a reference, Gesamtmeldte Schriften.
Schriften is the collected writings. Yes, the collective writings of Leopold Zunz. You can find the essay that Geiger is reacting to. Go ahead.
Okay, in which you very edifyingly expand on the beneficial effect of the practice of putting on phylacteries. If
Or they. Well, what did he do? He didn't put on phylacteries. He didn't put on tefillin. What did he do? He wrote an essay saying that there are, positive elements in it. Okay, go ahead.
If I am not mistaken, I did already express to you my surprise at this article on a previous occasion. There is no doubt that any ceremony may take on a deeper meaning and that it is never altogether devoid of significance. But should this rite, which is based on misinterpretation of certain biblical passages, which is linked purely to those excesses associated with charms and amulets, and which is so completely alien to our own thinking and to our own culture and sense of beauty, truly have such beneficial effects. What is dead remains dead. The spirit which was once contained within it still continues to manifest itself, but in other ways and in other forms. To seek to reawaken it now would be a vain endeavor, and even if it were to meet with success, would have only deplorable, soul-killing, and demoralizing consequences.
Let's unpack this paragraph about tefillin. Okay. First of all, it's based on a misinterpretation of certain biblical passages. What does that mean?
Well, the Shema.
Yeah.
It's the passages in the Shema, that's right. It's a very central biblical passage.
It's not the
Okay.
it's an interpretation.
Okay, well, I propose to you that the meaning of this sentence simply is Midrash is dumb. Okay, Midrash is stupid. Okay, Geiger knows Midrash. Okay, and Geiger doesn't think very much of it. Midrash is playing around with verses in ways that misinterpret them. You already see here that for Geiger, the written Torah is not a Karaite, but the written Torah is somehow more central to him, more important to him than is the Midrash or the oral Torah. And the Midrash, it plays with the written Torah in ways that just don't make sense. Okay, so you have this practice which is based on a midrashic misinterpretation, and it's associated with charms and amulets. Okay, meaning it is superstitious. Yeah.
Question, what's the German word that they're translating phylacteries?
I don't know. Tefillin,
Because
phylacteries.
phylacteries is a problematic term. You look up tefillin in the dictionary, it says phylacteries, and nobody knows what that means either.
Yeah,
Phylacteries comes from phylakteros, which is the
Yeah.
Greek word for lucky charm.
lucky charm.
And that's where the idea that tefillin
Yeah.
was somehow some kind of
It's
amulet.
quite
But
likely,
that's not what they are.
it's quite likely the Geiger knew that. Okay, I didn't know that, by the way. But it's quite likely the Geiger knew that the very word that he's using, right, reflects on
So I wonder what it is.
superstition. But I don't know if he used
If
tefillin,
it's
phylacteries, I have no idea.
Of phylacteries,
Yeah.
it's not accurate.
If I had to put money on it, I would guess that he uses some German version of phylactery, because that would bring home his point. Okay, in a very nice,
But
way.
it's totally inaccurate.
Finally, it's alien to our thinking and our sense of beauty, meaning it is unaesthetic. They have a bunch of men winding black straps on their arms in the synagogue, rolling up their sleeves in public, and then on their head. No, this is unaesthetic. You would not see such a thing in a church, and we don't want to see such a thing in a synagogue.
Can I just,
Okay, yeah.
what makes him wrong and the people who wrote the Midrash correct? They've interpreted what was written the way they think,
Yeah.
and he, centuries later, interprets it in a totally different way. Who says that he's wrong?
Look, in the Middle Ages, the Rashbam already said that the plain sense of the biblical text does not indicate putting on tefillin. Now, the Rashbam put on tefillin. Okay, why did the Rashbam put on tefillin in his own mind? Because he said the plain sense of the biblical text is important, and the Midrash is even more important. Okay, they're both true. Okay, but they each have their own importance. It's not like Geiger was the first person to realize this. You're asking what makes him wrong. Our point here this evening is not to say that he was wrong. Our point, I do find this letter humorous, I have to admit it. But our point here this evening is to get a sense of who the guy is and to get a sense of what Reform Judaism was in the 19th century. Okay, and part of it was the Bible, and that Midrash stuff is kind of, strange and superstitious. Yeah.
Even in the Bible, it says, stuff 10,
Uchtavtam, write them.
stuff 10.
Right. Al mezuzot. So in the mezuzah you're writing, you're saying Chana. So maybe in the tefillin write it. That's an argument in favor of the Midrash. That's good to justify the Midrash. However, with respect, historically, we, by the way, know something that historians didn't know in the 19th century. Historians in the 19th century figured that tefillin was a late rabbinic midrashic invention. But what do we now know? Who knows?
They're very ancient.
They were dug up in Qumran.
In Qumran. And
It's
they
very-
look exactly the same as the
Yeah,
ones
and it's the
we've
same
read.
model, basically, okay,
They're not
as modern
they're not as
tefillin.
neat.
And this is 2 centuries, before the Common Era, during the Second Temple period. So it's not necessarily a rabbinic invention, and it's not necessarily a misinterpretation of the verse. Regardless, it's not our point. Our point is that, what we're trying to understand, what does not find favor in Geiger's eyes? Mistakes in interpreting the Bible, superstitions, things which are unaesthetic or uncultural. That's what he doesn't like. And tefillin meets
All of them.
every single one of them. And so he doesn't understand how a learned man like Tzunz can write an article which looks with a kind eye on tefillin. This is his problem. Okay? All right. At the end, he talks about spirit, and what he's saying is that, maybe an ancient practice once had meaning, but when it's emptied of meaning, there's no sense of practicing it anymore. And you should find a new practice which can embody that kind of meaning, rather than going back to these old forms, which are just like, they're dead husks.
But it's
Okay.
more than just dead husks.
Yeah.
He says they're deplorable soul killing.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Yeah, it's also
Pretty hostile.
He's pretty hostile. He doesn't mince words with us.
Wrong opinion.
Okay, let's go on. I'll try to get it positioned for you, Joseph. Okay.
Thank you. Okay, this essay was followed by your opinion on the rite of circumcision. I was not in agreement with the Reform Verein. Okay, its adherents were not clear as to the goals they sought to pursue, nor were they sufficiently sincere in their pronouncements. And instead of choosing a more circumspect approach to the masses and refraining from moving by such leaps and bounds, the elected to attack the rite of circumcision. I think the word should be they elected to attack the rite of circumcision, which was still considered the very nerve fiber of Judaism. On the other hand, I
Stop.
must admit,
Joe, stop, look for my hand if I go like this, okay?
okay,
Uh,
all right.
So let's unpack this now. The Reform Verein is this council of Reform rabbis or lay leaders of the Reform movement or something like that. What did they decide to do which did not find favor in
Des-
Geiger's eyes?
They decided to reject circumcision.
They decided to completely abandon it. We will no longer have circumcision in the Reform movement, period. Why does Geiger not agree with them? What did he say so far? Okay, not clear as to goals, sincere, whatever. Instead of choosing a more circumspect approach to the masses and refraining from moving by such leaps and bounds, in other words, what would have Geiger preferred?
Doing it slowly.
Doing it slowly.
Making it an option.
Maybe initially making it an option and then later on just getting rid of it, okay? Do it as a process, maybe wait a few years because Jews are so attached to circumcision. It's such a central symbol that the masses were not willing to give it up. And if the Reform movement gives up circumcision completely, what is he worried about?
They're not going to have many to follow them.
Exactly. The German Jews won't join Reform synagogues. Yeah,
Right? In those days, to perform circumcision,
yeah.
before we knew about infections and bacteria and all, how dangerous was it? How many babies died because of it?
Wasn't.
I don't know. I don't know.
Because nowadays, I mean, I remember I sent a kid into hospital because he was bleeding from the
Yeah.
circumcision, which,
Yeah.
I mean, if it hadn't been a hospital, I don't know what would have happened.
Gordon, I don't know the answer.
So these days, in a way, an educated person, you can almost understand.
Yeah.
We're doing this barbaric thing and kids
Yeah.
are dying because of it. Are you sure this is what we should be doing?
I don't-
think that
yeah.
many kids were dying because of it.
If we don't know, that's what worries me.
Well, you know what?
Don't talk about
You know
it.
what? No. You didn't research it, I didn't research it, but I'm sure there is research.
What
And
I,
I'm sure that we can
I don't
find out.
know. It'd be interesting.
look, I don't think that Geiger had the sensitivities of a medical doctor.
No, yeah.
Meaning, he wasn't worried about children dying so much as he was displeased.
It was barbaric.
It's barbaric, why do it, that kind of thing. Hold on. And what I will tell you is that traditional halachists, you know, they live in the real world. Okay, if children were dying from circumcision, there would be an answer to it. I do remember from years and years ago, dozens of years ago, we studied a little bit about Brit Milah for smicha. Okay, and all of the rules about, you know, is the child strong? Is the child weak? Should it be postponed? Should it not be postponed? And always it you know, it leans towards postponing it, right? If there's any worry whatsoever, you know, I don't think it's fair to say that halachists were, you know, uncaring about dangers from circumcision. But having what?
I happen to be the only one who knows something about it.
Okay.
And I can tell you that it is absolutely simple, without any difficulty. Anybody can do that surgery. There is no danger.
No,
The real
this is-
danger.
you're both doctors.
But
Well,
the
the danger is-
sterilization today, that's it.
Yeah.
In those days, nobody knew about infection.
Yeah, I haven't finished.
They didn't know about.
The real danger
Let him
is
finish.
the response.
Yeah.
Response.
He's talking, listen.
Go ahead.
The response of the ritual is what is called mitzvah.
Mm,
And mitzvah can be very
That
dangerous.
can infect.
If the mohel has some problem, infection in the mouth,
Mhm.
then he
Yes.
can
But
transmit
he's
that.
talking about excessive
But
bleeding.
that is rare. It does happen and did children do, but they did that from the infection given to the infant by the mohel, but
Mhm.
it's not because of the surgery itself.
Okay.
You know, there is a midrash that when God created Adam, he did not have foreskin. he got the 14 only after he was discharged from Karmiel.
Okay.
So circumcision is going back to the life of God.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen on Zoom, we've had a long discussion here in Kilat Hakerem. We have two doctors here. And the two doctors, I think they're a little bit at odds with each other on this question of,
Let me just say one thing about that also is that.
yeah,
In the general scheme of things,
yeah,
many children died at a young age.
anyways.
Anyway, the families had very large families because
Mhm.
they didn't expect children to pass the age of 5.
Yes.
The kid made it to 15 or bar mitzvah, that was.
Okay.
It made it to
Let-
30
Let's,
days, it wasn't something.
let's wrap up this discussion of the medical dangers of circumcision. Because we have too many experts. Bottom line is, I don't think that's really Geiger's point. Okay, even if it's not dangerous, Geiger sees lots of reasons to get rid of it. And we should go on now with the text. He says that, you're moving too fast and, this should have been more carefully considered and all of that. Go ahead, please, on the other hand.
On the other hand, I must admit I cannot find it within me to take so decided a stand in favor of circumcision simply because it is and has ever been a time-honored practice. The fact remains that it is a barbaric, gory rite which fills the infant's father with fear and subjects the new mother to harmful emotional strain. The sense of sacrifice, which in days long past lent an aura of consecration to the ceremony, has long since vanished from out mists. Nor is it out from our, I guess should be our mist, nor is it so brutal a thought deserving of perpetuation, sorry. True, in the olden days, religious sentiment may well have clung to it. At present, however, its only foundations are habit and fear, and we surely have no desire to dedicate temples to either. And as for the attitude which you seem to adopt towards all reforms in general.
Okay, I left out some text here, but what's going on is that there's a radical wing of the reform movement in the 19th century, named by a fellow by the name of Samuel Holtheim, okay? And the topic that's going to come up next in this letter is Holtheim's attempt to move Shabbat to
Sunday.
Sunday.
But before you do that,
Yeah.
a question,
Yes,
all right?
I must, shall I go?
question, yeah.
It's all talk about barbarity and that sort of thing. Just a cover for their notion as emancipated
Mm,
German Jews
yeah,
to pass,
To be like a.
to pass
in
in society.
in the US Army. One thing I can tell you,
Mhm,
you could be seen without your pants on or anything else.
yeah,
Now, most of the guys in my unit were Southern,
yeah.
all right? They didn't look the same way I looked,
Mhm,
all right?
mhm,
And they could tell the difference.
okay.
And I can tell you what, well, one guy shouted out when he saw me, all right? And it's vulgar, I'm warning you. You mean to tell me you're a fucking Jew?
Wow.
If I had a foreskin, you wouldn't have said that, would he?
Uh-huh. In other words, the suggestion here in Kilat Hakerem is that maybe it's just in order to be able to pass as a Gentile, that it would be good to get rid of circumcision, if for no other reason. Perhaps that's also behind what he's saying. Okay, okay, go ahead.
Okay, where are we?
I must confess.
Oh, yes. I must confess to you that, though I cannot subscribe to all his assertions, and though I cannot view every one of his measures as properly timed, I still love Holtheim most sincerely. I love him because I can recognize the zeal of honest conviction and of a higher moral tone in his every word. And to think that you, with all your mental vigor, should suddenly become impervious to all this pulsating intellectual life, that you should have come to conceive of the past not just as the history of the development of thought, but as the standard to be applied to our present intellectual endeavors. This was a phenomenon that pained me deeply. I lamented the loss of a man such as Zunz for the endeavors that stir even more strongly as time goes on. I deplored the possibility that even the most vigorous of minds may become closed at a certain stage. Frankly, I feared also for myself.
He's writing this to Tzunz. I lamented the loss of a man such as Tzunz. For the index.
It's ready to say Kadish.
Not only that, but he's saying, I'm also afraid if it could happen to Tzunz, it could also happen to me. God forbid I should go on in life and like revert to primitive culture or primitive levels of thought or whatever you have here. What's going on here is that the reform movement is proposing all kinds of rather extreme reforms to get rid of circumcision, to move the Shabbat to Sunday and things like that. Leopold Tzunz is not so pleased by these developments, and Geiger writes to him and says, "Look, you know, as a politician, I can agree with you. Maybe it's too fast, but in principle." They're right. And how can you go ahead and write articles saying that these things are actually good? Things like circumcision or what was the other one? Phylacteries and stuff like that. How could an intelligent man like you, how could the founder of the field of academic Jewish history, right? Don't you have a sense of history? Don't you understand that tefillin is ancient primitive stuff that has no longer any relevance? How could you go for all of this, barbaric traditional stuff, circumcision, whatever? And the worst of all is not the essays that Tzunz writes, where he says maybe tefillin has some kind of positive value. The worst thing of all is what he does in his own home. God forbid. Okay, look what he does in his own home. Go ahead, Joseph.
And then came the news about your private life. I think should be, it was said that you had suddenly decided to keep a strictly kosher home and everything that goes with it. Certainly, I would respect such obligations as everyday life imposes, and I would see nothing either unusual or strange in your conduct if you had thought it advisable thing to do under the given circumstances, out of consideration for your position as head of the seminary.
Stop there. What does that mean?
It means if you're doing it as political pretense,
it's who's gonna donate money to the Seminary for Reform rabbis if in their cafeteria they serve treif? So if you as head of the seminary, for that reason, wanted a kosher kitchen in the rabbinical seminary, I would understand. But to do it in your own home, to make your be.
Kosher out?
He's accusing him of hypocrisy.
No, he's not accusing him of hypocrisy. No.
Well,
He's crying because he thinks he's being honest. He thinks that Tzunz really thinks there's value in keeping kosher. Otherwise, he wouldn't have made his own kitchen in his house kosher.
It's actually
No, I'm talking
representing
about-
hypocrisy.
What about Geiger?
Geiger is accusing.
No, he's not.
Not accusing him.
He's not accusing him of hypocrisy. He's worried. He's terrified that Tzunz is being sincere. Did Tzunz really want to go?
Hypocrisy would be okay with him.
He's the head of the seminary. If the students see that he keeps kosher at home, maybe they will think that that's.
That there's importance in it.
You get it?
No,
No,
because his friend is against feeling.
his friend Samuel Holtheim is the guy. But the one he's writing to is Tzunz. Tzunz likes tefillin. And that's what's bothering him. That's why he's writing this letter.
Yeah, I understand. Thank you.
Okay? Okay, let's go on, but what?
In other words, he's a heretic.
He's a heretic of the reform. Okay, go ahead, Joseph, but it was said.
But it was said that you did this not because you felt that your position necessitated it, but out of principle.
In other words, you didn't do it for politics, you did it because you believed in it. I can't believe that you can believe in it. That's what he's writing the letter for.
Is Tzvi considered the first, conservative rabbi?
No, he's the head of the Reform
But I
Seminary,
mean,
and he's the
he's-
historian. What?
he's going the opposite direction. He's in reform, but he's pulling away from reform.
Well,
He's not pulling away from reform. He's just not like,
moving fast enough.
yeah, he doesn't have affection for all of the extreme moves that the reform movement is beginning to make.
But he's-
More of a
Not
traditional
reform
reform.
enough.
It was not reformed fast enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead, Joseph.
I must admit that I cannot see that at all. It is precisely these dietary laws that are so void of rationale, and at the same time such a hindrance to the development of social relationships.
Now, that was 50, right? A, it doesn't make sense to keep kosher, and B, it prevents you from having social relationships with Gentiles.
Which was part of.
Now, part of the reason for various elements of kashrut is to prevent social relationships with Gentiles. But that's that a Geiger, of course, would see as something for the pre-modern world. Okay, go ahead.
Truly, the ideal of the deeper sense of brotherhood among men should have priority over the revival of that sense of separation, which is both devoid of color and is of very dubious value.
No,
Consequently, I could attach more value to almost anything rather than to this particular branch of rabbinic legal practice that has been cultivated from micrology, from
He means.
almost madness.
and almost sheer madness. I don't know what that word is actually. It might be microbiology, but that doesn't sound right. Okay, thus I find myself asking this question. Can he really believe that he is serving some purpose with this? He's still writing to Zunz at this point, right?
Yes.
Oh, can he so he's changed to the first person different, right? Not you. It says can he? It's like a third person now. He's put Zunz in a third person.
Letter, thinking to myself, can Zunz really mean this? Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Can he really think that in this way it will be possible to create a healthy Judaism, one that will stimulate mind and spirit and stir men to action, a Judaism of a sort that will include everything that is truly human? I keep searching for the answer, but much as I seek to pursue views among the most divergent directions, I cannot find an explanation that will satisfy me.
He's looking for an explanation of how somebody as intelligent as Zunz could make these decisions, and he cannot find an answer. And now he gets personal at the end of the letter.
Yeah. So it's interesting. He's switching personal sort of you, I to he. Okay. Please be good enough to remember me to your wife.
There.
There.
What? Even though she may punctiliously see to it that no milchig fish, no milchig knife will as much as touch a fleshig tablecloth. And though she may push her bonnet down almost to the tip of her nose. She will always remain my friend. As for us, we are well, thank God, both milchik and fleshik. Our kosher lunches and dinners agree with us splendidly. And in short, we are as well as all gebenchte Yiddische Kinder should be.
All right, we skipped a paragraph where he says, you know, I still have feelings for you, you're still my friend and all of that. And then at the end, he says, you know, regards to your wife, and he makes fun of the wife because if the kosher, if the kitchen at home is going to become kosher, it's going to be her. Maybe it's her who wanted it even, you know, even though she, with her milchik knife and her fleshik, and she may push her bonnet almost to the tip of her nose. He's very funny here at the end. She will remain my friend. Okay?
It seems to me what's missing in this whole thing
Yes.
is very basis of it, which is that all these laws are meant to separate us. They're meant to separate us. He's trying to say, okay, we want to be German. We don't want to be
We don't want to be
Yeah.
separate.
a part of the Jewish nation. We want to remain
Yeah.
nominally Jewish, but we
Don-
want to be assimilated into the culture.
And he said that.
Don is saying something.
Willing to-
Don is saying something very meaningful, okay? The traditional Jewish ethos, which goes to the heart of many of the mitzvot, is to be separate, is to be different. But the Protestant conception of religion doesn't have in it any need to be different. The Protestant conception of religion is that you have to, you know, follow the truth of the Bible as best you understand it and encourage others to do the same. And in order to do that, you need to be together with other people as much as you possibly can. It doesn't matter who they are, doesn't matter what their culture or language is. Okay, it's universal. And that ethos is extraordinarily different than the ethos of the pre-modern Jewish tradition. Yeah.
Because we understood that mixing with others might influence us badly.
Right, mixing
And
with
so
others might
we wanna keep
influence
separate.
us. And then whereas Geiger is very happy in 19th century Germany to have mixing with others and have it influence us, let it influence us. This is high culture. Okay, this is modernity. This is a modern nation state. Let's have as much of it as we possibly can. Okay, and have a Judaism which doesn't prevent us from having as much of it as we possibly can. Okay.
Did they talk about having their noses fixed? And have the long hook nose?
I don't know if German
That they
Jews
fit in?
did
I
nose
don't think
surgery. I have
those
no
jobs
idea.
then.
Well, you know, if they have to fit in,
Okay,
and assuming they have to
Okay.
look like the Germans too. They're dressing like the Germans, they're not having the same body modifications as the
Mhm.
Germans,
Mhm.
right?
I don't
So.
think plastic surgery
They have
has
to
been invented.
well, I don't have, I don't have, I don't,
Part, they have to look the part.
so that's a thoughtful suggestion, nose jobs. And in 19th century Germany, all right, but seriously, folks, we'll stop here, we'll take a short break until 51, okay? And we will resume with Orthodoxy.
That's a great piece, by the way.
Multiple versions.
Yes.
In our city, there were 3 Reformed congregations, and each of them had a different kind of level of understanding how much, halacha, if you want to call it, to observe and how much not to observe. And
Yeah.
I think that was true across the board, at least in the United States, in terms of you can't really make a statement in 20th century for Judaism that reflected the whole range of possibilities.
Okay, so there were lots of different kinds of.
But that's also true for Orthodoxy.
Exactly.
And in no subject more so than in kashrut, because if you go from rabbi to rabbi to rabbi to rabbi, you get all different versions of what you can and cannot do.
Yeah.
which
Well,
is part of my problem relating to kashrut in general, which
okay,
I observe in my home for other people, not for me. It's,
okay, that's also a reason, because we're a people. All right,
Yeah,
let's.
well,
get started.
I also grew up in Reform congregation. The men did wear talitot, which is interesting.
Mm.
But well, the attitude was kashrut was for hygienic purposes at that time, which are not relevant today.
That's a pretty well-known claim as well. Let's go.
Except that you
Yeah.
could sell a non-kosher animal to a non-Jew.
Yeah,
And if it was not healthy, we wouldn't be allowed to do that. It
Yeah.
was just, we weren't allowed to.
okay, okay, agreed. Let's get onto the Orthodox track now. Okay? I heard a short piece of a lecture this afternoon when I was looking for like a little more material on this to enrich it. And it's somebody who I've mentioned before. It's Manito. Okay, Manito is this, it's a nickname for this French rabbi who was a thinker, okay, in the mid-20th century, and he had a deep influence on a lot of Jews in France. And I heard a recording of a little piece of a lecture of his that he gave in Hebrew with a deep French accent. And it was entitled Reform and Orthodoxy. First of all, it was the war in which there are no winners. Okay, that's how he began it. And what he said is that there was a terrible price to be paid for reacting to the reform movement. Okay, not talking about the reform movement itself, whether you identify with it, don't identify with it. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the reaction to it. Okay, I have a friend in this Hartman program that I'm doing, Rabbanut Israelit, that Sigalit runs, right? And he says that he's angry at reform. Why is he angry at reform? Not for being reformed, but for what it did to Orthodoxy. Okay, and there's more than a bit of truth in that. But what he meant was, because of reform, so Orthodoxy gets extreme and Orthodoxy gets strict, and it shouldn't be that way, but it's because of the reaction to reform. All of that is true. However, something much, much deeper than that happened with the reaction to reform. Okay. What I'll do is I'll share the screen. I'll share with you a few points, and we'll see the points from one to the next from the I wouldn't say it's from most lenient to the most severe. First of all, reform and orthodoxy. Reform comes first, and orthodoxy comes in Germany as a reaction to reform. And here we have reform, the letter to Leopold Zunz. And now I'm going to give you 3 foundations of European Orthodox traditionalism. First, we need to talk about, I emphasized it in the text, what is traditionalism? We know what tradition is. Tradition is what we talked about earlier when Gordon asked this question. Tradition means I learn how to be a Jew from my parents, from my community. I'm going to be a Jew pretty much like
them.
In the past.
Grandfather.
My children are going to be Jews pretty much like
Me.
I am, okay? That's a traditional world. And in a traditional world, you learn the tradition from the behavior of the people around you, from the from the ideas of the people behind you, around you, okay? And it happens naturally. In a traditional world, for instance, where do you learn the laws of kashrut?
Your mother in the kitchen.
Kitchen. You don't learn it from books. Who learns kashrut from books?
The rabbis.
Only rabbis, and rabbis only do it for those especially difficult questions that somebody may not know from the tradition. And so you know, the tradition isn't enough. You know, what you learned in your mother's kitchen isn't enough to know what to do with this chicken. So you bring it to the rabbi, and the rabbi, you know, from his book learning, may not know what to do in such a special circumstance,
So, yeah,
which
his
you
wife.
don't learn by tradition, or he asks his wife. Very nice. Okay? That's tradition. What is traditionalism?
You copied what was used to be traditional.
Ideology.
It's an ideology. And it's an ideology which says that the tradition must be continued exactly as it is. Because if you don't continue the tradition exactly as it is, what will happen?
Change.
You will willy-nilly become
Reform.
or an assimilationist or whatever it is. Okay? Now, that's not an accusation that comes out of nowhere. I mean, there was reform before Geiger. That letter was 1854 or something like that. I don't remember. But there was reform even earlier than that. Okay? And even before there was an official reform movement in Germany, there were people who came and said, for instance, okay, let's go and correct the prayers in the Siddur, in the Jewish prayer book, because grammatically there are mistakes in them. Does that sound so radical?
No?
Not today.
But to you, it doesn't sound radical, okay. And as a matter of fact, never was it radical in a traditional world, okay? And in fact, there were no exact words that necessarily had to be said, okay, in a traditional world. But what happens is that the rabbis who would eventually become called Orthodox said absolutely not. They said, if you start correcting the grammar in the Siddur, what's the next step gonna be? Well, we'll take Yerushalayim out of the Siddur. We'll take the land of Israel out of the Siddur. We'll take what?
Put women into it.
Put women into it. Who knows what?
Into
Okay.
dancing.
And you know, and what I'm telling you here is what's called the slippery slope argument. And there's all kinds of fallacies with the slippery slope argument. That's true. And yet the slippery slope argument has truth. And what these rabbis said in the early 1800s was borne out. That you start with a few grammatical corrections, and what's eventually going to happen? Samuel Holtheim and Abraham Geiger. Okay, and it only took a generation and a half, right, for that to unfold. Now, if you're going to continue the tradition exactly as it is, because it's too dangerous to change anything, okay, what will be the results of that? The first is the modern world. You'll need to say that the modern world has no intrinsic value. Why?
It's changing.
Because if it did have intrinsic value, it would be the most extraordinary change ever. And when circumstances change, the halacha needs to address, maybe in a different way, the new circumstances. So the only way you can have halacha keep on going exactly as it is with no changes is to say that modernity is out of bounds. We have no need of it. Okay, that of course does not mean that you won't have certain practical uses for modernity. Okay, it's that it has no intrinsic value. If it can help you make a living, okay. If it can help you, I don't know, improve your printing press, okay. Okay, those are mechanical. Those are, if it can help, yeah, okay. Medicine, like came up earlier, okay. Those are practical advantages you don't have to reject. Okay, these people are not like Amish in the United States. okay? And yet it has no value intrinsically in terms of the Torah. Because modernity is such a big change, does not mean that there are any practices which should be changed.
Question for you.
Yeah,
Okay, in the Midrash,
yeah,
all right, it's not uncommon that when a rabbi is making an argument to support some interpretation of his own,
yeah.
that he'll change a letter in a word, one word,
Mhm.
all right, to make his point.
Yeah,
So he's changing Torah, Talmud, right then and there,
yeah.
to argue a point.
All right, get up, take a bow. Okay, you deserve it. Okay, what is the point that's being made here? The point that's being made here is the argument or the accusation that, look at this word again, traditionalism. That
Yeah.
traditionalism is anti-traditional. That's what you're giving an example of.
Yeah.
Okay, and that of course was, first of all, the reply of the reformists. The reformists would have said, certainly, what's his name, Noah Geiger would have said, that I am more faithful to the tradition than all of you Orthodox people. Because your traditionalism is the opposite of the tradition. And my making changes with the needs of the time is what the tradition does. Okay, and that is certainly a valid argument. Okay. Now, halakha allows for no practical change. Do you know what this means? You have any idea what this means?
Frozen in time.
What?
It's
You're
frozen.
frozen in time.
In time, what this means is literally a monumental disaster. The monumental disaster is that, first of all, of course, there may be all kinds of situations and circumstances and practical needs and intrinsic needs, right, that cannot be met if the halakha cannot change with time. Okay, and that's what I think you mean by frozen in time. But there's something even worse than that. You know what it means? Brace yourselves. You can no longer learn the halakha from tradition. You can no longer learn kashrut in your parents' kitchen. Why not? Why not?
They might do it a little different than.
All right, might do it a little different because the world is changing so fast. And Jews are going in so many millions of different directions, assimilationists and reformists and enlightened Jews and what have you.
So there's only
Okay.
one right way. And
Whoa,
you
whoa,
have to
whoa,
go.
whoa. Because Jews are going in a million different directions, you can no longer learn the tradition from Jews, including your parents. Who's to say that your parents are exactly in line with the tradition? Okay. What will this force us to do? How will we be able to learn the tradition now?
You have to go to learn.
It can only be learned through the books now. It can only be learned through study. You cannot know the tradition now if you're not a Torah scholar. Okay. In the past, it wasn't like that. In the past, Jews knew the tradition. And the rabbi was a scholar, if there was a very, very unusual, serious question, you brought it to the rabbi. Right? Now, Jews cannot know the tradition. Only Jews who learn know the tradition. Meaning, you cannot make any decision on your own without going
Rabbi.
to the rabbi.
Or controls.
Okay?
Or
You
to the
can,
books.
so you see that there's an issue of control here, there definitely is. But it doesn't even start with the issue of control. It starts with the issue of insecurity. Okay? If the tradition is no longer stable, we're relegated to the books. The books are tough. right? It's not easy to become a Talmudic halachic scholar. The books are really tough. And now only those who know the books will be able to tell you what the tradition says. This will also lead to something we saw this last year. Last year, when we did the Middle Ages, okay, we saw at one point how many times the practices in the circumstances and the practices in medieval Europe were different than the circumstances and practices in Babylon, which are expressed in the Babylonian Talmud. And then Jews in Europe, fantastic Torah scholars in Europe, would study the Babylonian Talmud, and what would they find? That the local custom was different than what was described in the Babylonian Talmud. And what would they do 99.9% of the time? Who remembers?
Maintain
keep
the
the tradition.
yeah, maintain the local tradition.
The local tradition, and they would find some intellectual way, right, to make the local tradition conform with what is found in the Babylonian Talmud, even if they had to reinterpret the Babylonian Talmud in a very unusual way. Okay, that was what happened in the Middle Ages. That was what happened in a traditional time. What's going to happen in modern times?
You're going to change it.
The exact opposite. Jews are no longer following the tradition.
Mhm.
You can no longer learn the tradition from Jews. We can only find the tradition in books.
So you're all.
So wait. So if the tradition that we see doesn't fit with what we see in the books, what will we do?
You have to change it.
We will change the pre-accepted practice to conform with what we find in the books, which, by the way, the vast majority of the time makes the halakha much stricter. That's what happens when you say halakha allows for no practical change. It's not just a matter of, your Shabbat looks like their Shabbat. So Gordon, when you brought it up earlier, okay, it was good you brought it up earlier with Reform. Now let's bring it up again with Orthodoxy. An Orthodox Jew in the 19th century, does his Shabbos look pretty much like his grandfather's Shabbos? Most likely, yes. Okay, and yet it's not going to remain that way. Okay, halakha allows for no practical change, but you don't even know what change is if you don't know what the tradition is. We're going to go back to the books and find out what this unchanging halakha always used to say, and we're going to apply it, and that's going to cause willy-nilly the laws of Shabbat to be different than they were for your grandfather. Okay, to give you an example of that, I should have brought this. I didn't think of it as an example before I came. At home, I have two different versions of a famous book called Shmirat Shabbat Kihilchata, which means keeping the Shabbat according to the Halacha. Now, the very fact that somebody publishes a book under that title in the 1960s or 70s, okay, already says that Jews are already not quite so sure how to keep the Shabbat any longer, especially with modern, appliances and things like that. They're not so sure. And instead of learning it from their parents, what do they need? A book to tell them how to keep Shabbat. Nobody wrote a book like that 500 years ago, right? It's only now that you get a book like that, and every Shabbat observing Jew wants that book on his shelf. Okay? So we have the book published. The book is published in two versions. Okay, first it's published in its first edition. Okay, and in the first edition, there were various leniencies which the author considered correct, which is fine. And then people found those leniencies in the first edition, and you can't rely on things like that. And so there had to be a second censored version. Right? usually you think if you buy a book, the second edition is improved, right? For Shmirat Shabbat Kihilchata, so you can only find in the bookstore, you can only find the second edition. And you have to look and you have to find the first edition and keep it on yourself so you can see what he really wrote when he was expressing his own opinion. Okay, this is something that you don't find in traditional halachic discourse. Yeah.
Question. When was it determined that the halakha means that nothing changes?
When?
When was
The 19th
When
century.
did halakha say that nothing changes?
It doesn't.
Okay.
Doesn't say.
So this is an invention.
This is what will be. Did you? Traditionalism, which you're also arguing that traditionalism is anti-traditional, also anti-halachic. You said it. Okay, but it's anti-traditional. That's the argument you're making. That is like the argument against this.
Okay. I'm saying that change itself is natural. And the halakha is supposed to reflect change.
So again, you're saying the traditionalism, right? The ideology that says halakha does not change is anti-traditional. It look the same, but it's not the same. Remember before with Gordon, right? It looks the same, but I tried to say the mentality isn't the same, right? This is what I meant. This mentality is profoundly anti-traditional. Profoundly anti-traditional. Even if maybe it looks the same as it did before. Okay?
So people can also always be in this mentality, living in fear of doing something wrong, right? Of making a mistake. You have to check.
You could have
It depends on what you learned from your mother's kitchen.
Yeah.
You got to look at a book. So God forbid, I'm going to make a mistake with the kashrut in the house. That's so.
And God forbid your suddenly discover your mother's doing something wrong.
Right. Then you won't eat in your mother's house.
Then you got to tell your parents.
You're not going to eat in your mother's house anymore.
Okay. Last but not least, unfortunately, this is not chronological. We're supposed to be in the 19th century, but this gets expressed explicitly more in the early 20th century. But since it comes out of this topic, I'm doing it now. Okay? And that is Das Teure. Have you heard of Das Teure? You have. Okay, some people haven't. All right. I remember in high school, this is a good example of it. In high school, we used to, the yeshiva used to get, every month, the Jewish Observer. The Jewish Observer was the magazine of Agudas Yisrael of America. Okay? And on the front cover, okay, it had a big picture of Rav Shach. Remember Rav Shach? Okay? Had a big picture of Rav Shach. And it said that how silly people are that they give more respect to a Torah scroll than to a living embodiment of Torah, meaning the sage of the generation. And what was this issue about? It was about, we go through so much in this country that we don't remember, what happened a generation ago or so, right? It was about Chok HaGolan. Who remembers Chok HaGolan? It was during the Begin government, okay? It was during the Begin government. The Begin government passed a law that put Israeli sovereignty over the Golan.
No.
And Agudat Yisrael voted against it. Okay, why did Agudat Yisrael vote against it? Because it's chutzpah to the goyim. The United States doesn't want this law, okay? And it's chutzpah to the goyim, okay? And the United Nations doesn't want it, obviously. So it's chutzpah to the goyim to pass this law, okay? So they voted against it, and the government passed it nonetheless. And Agudat Yisrael was very upset about it that, you know, the rabbinic sage said that this law must be rejected, okay? And the government passed it nonetheless. And this was a traditional government, right? Menachem Begin, the traditional man, and it had the religious parties in the government, and they passed this law against the advice of Rav Shach. Okay? And to me,
Instructions.
what? Instructions.
Advice.
Instructions of Rav Shach. Okay. So to me, as a high school student, right, this was all new. Okay? And it was all about, all the articles in that issue were about Das Teure, Das Teure, Das Teure. And you have to listen to Das Teure, okay? And it doesn't matter what you think about the Golan law. That's not the issue here. The issue is when the government passes a law with international ramifications, does it have to get the approval of the Committee of Torah Sages of Agudat Israel? That's the question. Okay, and to me, this was to me it was so totally new because my yeshiva was not very Israel centered. Okay, the yeshiva I was at was not very Israel centered, and like it wasn't like people were up in arms or yelling about the Golan law, right? But I saw the Jews with black hats in Israel, right? This was a very big issue for them. Right, and to me, I guess like the issue had the opposite effect on me that it was supposed to have on me. Okay, but it's also the first time I came in contact with this idea of Das Torah. So what is the idea of Das Torah? It used to be in traditional times that you learned how to be a Jew from the Jews around you, right? So far, so good. The Jews around you are no longer behaving like Jews. And the tradition is no longer stable. And you are not necessarily a Torah scholar. Certainly you're not the greatest Torah scholar of the generation. So when you make decisions, whom should you go to? Rabbi. You should go to the Torah scholar. Okay, now, we already saw elements of this in Chassidut, right? That you asked the tzaddik all kinds of questions. But the classic mitnagdim, the classic opponents of Chassidut were against that. They thought this was idolatry, that a chassid goes to the rabbi to ask him, I don't know, who to marry, what car to buy, what house to buy, what sheep to buy, whatever was going on in the 1700s, I guess not cars, okay? But you get the point. Okay, the Hasidim would go to the Rebbe and ask these questions. The Mitnagdim thought this was idolatry. A rabbi isn't there to tell you what horse to buy. A rabbi is there when you have a question about Torah, about halakha or something else in the Torah. That's when you go to a rabbi, right? If you have a medical problem, who do you go to?
A doctor.
Problem, who do you go to? A lawyer. You have a Torah problem, who do you go to? A rabbi. That was the mitnagdik viewpoint. And I already told you the joke about Rav Chaim Soloveitchik, right? The Jew comes to get a blessing. I didn't tell you the joke, I guess. No. Jew comes to Rav Chaim Soloveitchik to get a blessing, and Rav Chaim Soloveitchik says, "What are you, an apple?" that was the. I never know who I told the jokes to, who I didn't tell the jokes. All right, so that is the classic mitnagid. Okay, now what happens to the mitnagdim with emancipation and reform and all of this? What's going to happen to the mitnagdim now? The non-Hasidim, they're going to become like the Hasidim. They're going to say, you know, just, I'm not going to say it, but you can see the parallel, that just like the chassid goes to the tzaddik and asks about all kinds of things. Well, if you want to know what to do about the Golan law, I don't think Rav Shach learned the Golan law in yeshiva, right? But if you want to know what to do about the Golan law, you go to Rav Shach. Okay? You want to know what to do about whatever policy it is of the state of Israel, you go to whoever is the head of, you know, even now have an organization called the Mo'etzet Gedolei HaTorah, the council of the great Torah scholars of the generation, okay? And this is supposed to be the body that can give Das Torah, okay, for whatever the needs or whatever the questions are of the generation. So you have a lot less leeway now in life, okay? It used to be in traditional times that yes, you were governed by tradition, but within the tradition, you lived your life pretty much as lives were lived and as you saw fit. Now what's going on, the rabbi basically is supposed to have a say on practically everything. Okay, even in the old Kehillah, rabbis didn't control everything. In fact, the rabbis knew of and they wanted and they respected that there was a non-rabbinic leadership of the Kehillah. The rabbi had a function within the Kehillah, but the Kehillah wasn't run by the rabbi.
It was not a Rosh Kehillah.
Right. Okay.
But the whole thing is because the Kehillah lost all her power. So there was a vacuum.
Yofi, the Kehillah lost its power, which means the tradition lost its power. And now who's going to take that power? The rabbi. So here's the paradox. As the Kehillah becomes less encompassing, and thus you'd think the tradition is less compelling, rabbinic authority becomes more encompassing. Okay? But each communities had non-rabbinic leadership. Okay? And finally, last but not least, the posek, the scholar who decides matters of halakha. Okay? Whom is he deciding for?
For the rabbis.
Who is his audience?
Everybody.
Theoretically, yeah.
Okay, no longer. No longer. It used to be that if the Kehillah had some kind of halachic dilemma, and they brought it to the rabbi, and the rabbi was going to have to make a ruling, who was he going to have to make a ruling for? The entire Kehillah, the entire Jewish population of which he was the rabbi. Who was in that Kehillah? That traditional Kehillah, who was in there? There were educated people. There were ignoramuses. There were pious people. There were thugs. Okay, it was a community. You had all kinds of people. Okay, and whatever halachic ruling was made for that community was a ruling that was made with the entire community in mind. Jews of all different kinds of personalities and whatever. Now what's going to happen in modern times, when the rabbi makes a ruling of halakha, in a time when many Jews, or in some countries, most Jews, are going again in a million directions and they're not really concerned about the Torah anymore, then whom is he going to make his halachic ruling for?
For the rabbinic community.
For the community which still respects halachic rulings. Okay, and now I don't know if this, if this really throws you for a loop, but think about what a big change this is. Let's take Germany. In Germany, Jews are by the tens and hundreds of thousands going in non-traditional directions. Okay? Many, many Jews are attracted by people like Geiger, Holtheim, Sunz. Okay. So if an Orthodox rabbi in Germany gets asked a question, I shouldn't have said that. No, I shouldn't have said that. I really shouldn't have said that because it's the wrong example. Because I'm going to contradict the example in a second. Not Germany, okay? Not Germany, excuse me. Okay, if an Orthodox rabbi, let's take Hungary, okay? If an Orthodox rabbi in Hungary makes a ruling, he's only making the ruling for people who listen to rabbis, for people who feel themselves still bound by halakha. What will that cause to the act of making a ruling? What will that do to it?
It will diminish it, really, because it will be just not for everybody.
Okay, it means your frame of reference is no longer Am Yisrael.
It's your kihila, you're very,
It's
very.
not even your own kihila. It's only for those people in this country, okay, who still follow halakha. In other words, if your ruling is going to cause non-halachic Jews to become even more non-Jewish, do you care? No. Why? Because they're going to become more non-Jewish anyways.
And they're not part of your club.
They
They're
won't
not-
even
They're
listen.
not part of your club. They won't
They
listen to
won't
me
even-
anyway.
They won't even know about your halakha.
Yeah, not only won't they listen to me, they probably won't even know that I said it. Okay? And so what do I say to myself? I'll make a ruling for those people who still follow halakha. Now, who are going to be the people who still follow halakha? The people who feel connected to it. The people who are not miffed by it or who don't feel that it limits them, who feel that for some reason it enriches them, okay? That's gonna be your audience. And that's an audience that's going to be receptive even to rulings that in the past you might not have been able to make, okay? The obvious example is stringencies. If you're the rabbi of a pre-modern kehillah, you not only can you not make rules with extreme stringency, you don't even want to. Why would you want to? Okay, and if you did, what would happen?
People will not do it.
Lose something.
You will not do it. You'll lose your authority as the rabbi, right? Because people see that, you know, you're not someone who understands the community. Okay? So any rabbi in a kehillah who makes a ruling will make a rule. It's even, by the way, it's explicit in the Talmud. En gozrim gzera latzibur, she'en hatzibur yachol la'amod ba. You don't make a ruling for the community that the community cannot live up to. You don't do it in the first place. So whenever you're making a ruling as a traditional rabbi, you're always taking the whole community into account. Whereas in the 19th century, what happens? All of a sudden, you're only making rulings, okay, for
those who care what you say.
for the flummies,
Right.
okay? For the what? For your followers, it's more than your followers. It's like, let's say you're a prominent rabbi in Hungary, it will be for all of the Jews in Hungary who still follow rabbis.
Except
Yeah.
then somebody else will come and say, well, he is doing that, but I think differently. So whoever wants the stringency,
Yes.
come with me.
Whoever wants the stringency, come with me. That can happen. That's a dynamic which does happen. That if you're only talking to this kind of part of the population, and there's this willingness to accept stringency, it even encourages stringency. Okay. In other words, who will the community pick as the rabbi of the generation? Or to be very blunt about it, how did Rabbi Yashiv, after Rav Shach, and also Rav Shach himself, how did they become the Gedolei Hador?
They were more stringent than everybody else.
Right, because the Haredi community has a, how do you say, a nitiyah, has a tendency to pick davka, the person who will be more stringent.
Why was that not Germany as well?
So why not Germany? So in order to end this on a more positive note, okay, this is not the only kind of orthodoxy that developed, A. And B, other kinds of orthodoxies that developed also had one sad thing about it. Okay, I'll explain what I mean by this. First of all, I'll tell you a nice, colorful story. Okay, Oh, I can't tell you, it's already time's up already. Oh my gosh. Wow. I actually really thought we had another 20 minutes or something. Okay, officially it's 10 minutes. I don't know how tired people are already. All right, how about, you know what, let's not ruin it. I'll do the story at the beginning of next class,
Okay.
okay? To introduce you to some German Orthodox figures. German Orthodox figures are very different than the kind of thing I've been describing until now. What I described until now, it first flowered most blatantly in Hungary, okay? In Hungary, for some reason, I don't know why, but in Hungary, you got the most extreme Jews. Okay, the most extreme Reform was in Hungary, and also the most extreme Orthodox was in Hungary. Hungary is the place where you had the Khatam Sofer, who was the author of what Dan said earlier, a few minutes ago, Chadash Asur min HaTorah, anything new is prohibited by the Torah. That came from Hungary. Satmar Hasidim come from Hungary. Okay?
Conservatism came from Hungary too.
What?
Conservative movement came from Hungary.
Conservative movement, I wouldn't completely agree. You have Zechariah Frankel in Germany, who's considered the spiritual father of the conservative movement, but there was also a movement in Hungary, okay? There's a special kind of movement, which is a kind of neo-Orthodox.
Yeah.
Okay, neolog,
It was called neolog.
neolog.
And my grandmother and grandfather belonged to the neolog movement. And there was an organ in the synagogue, and I know that.
Okay. So yes, in Hungary, you did have all of that. And what I'm very sorry about is that we, on the one hand, we didn't touch on the thing I most wanted to touch on tonight, but we'll definitely touch on it next time.
Can you give us a teaser?
What? A teaser?
A teaser. Yeah.
All right, the teaser is two short words. Okay, two words that you all know. Am Yisrael.
Okay.
What happened? Where is Am Yisrael in this whole Reform Orthodox battle? But we'll do that next week. Okay?
Thank you.
That's it.
Okay, bye-bye.
תודה רבה.
Fascinating. What? Fascinating.
So-
Sure.